Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today we're looking at the TIE Phantom. This is also referred as the Phantom V-38. This is a prototype TIE series starfighter developed by the Galactic Empire during the Galactic Civil War. A modified V-38 assault fighter, the TIE Phantom was the result of a development project led by the Grand Admiral Martel Batch and was equipped with both deflector shields and a hyperdrive. Along with the technology not seen for decades, the Steergum cloaking device. The development process began in response to the rebel victory at the Battle of Yavin. After some initial troubles, Batch was able to secure a supply of Steergum, I'm going to mess this up, um, crystals required for the cloaking device. And the fighters entered production on Yamadar Alpha. When the testing process was completed following the Battle of Hoth, Darth Vader intended to use the new starfighter in a devastating assault on the Rebel Alliance fleet. However, over a series of encounters, the rebels learned of the new threat. Recognizing the danger, the Alliance dispatched pilots Rookie One and Rue Marlene to capture one of the fighters for study. The rebels successfully infiltrated the Superstar Destroyer Terror as it prepared to launch the fighters against the Alliance and escaped with one of them, which they used to destroy both the Terror and the facility where the fighters were produced. However, the rebels' acquisition of the fighter was short lived when the stolen TIE Phantom self destruct mechanism activated before the rebels could examine the fighter. The technology was lost after this. The fighters were kept in limited supply and given only to the most capable of Imperial fighter pilots. All right, so that gives us a little bit of a background on it. I'm not going to go into the whole design and armament and so on and so forth, the cloaking device, although that is very interesting. Now, looking at the picture here, it shows like five different cannons here. I will note that on our actual uh, stats here for the fighter, it only has three cannons on it. So even though it looks like it's got five, maybe even six on there, it only actually has three on there. So let's just, you know, I can only go off with what stats are there. Now, I'm not saying that you don't have a modified version, which it does have more on here, or maybe torpedo launchers or something, but I'm just trying to point that out. Now, the cloaking device um, is one of the most unusual features of the Sneer Systems Mark III Stignum cloaking device. The cloaking device utilized, if I can speak this afternoon, that would be wonderful, Stignum crystals in a high energy reactor. It gave the fighter the ability of unheard of, or that was unheard um, for ships of their size. In recent decades, the ability to appear effectively invisible to the naked eye, while at the same time evading sensors and scanners aboard other vessels. When the TIE Phantom was cloaked, other vessels could, at best, detect only an unusual sensor anomaly and were unable to get a firm reading, while the faint shimmering distortion that was the only visible indication of the fighter's presence was easily missed against the darkened backdrop of space. That sounds very much how in Star Trek they depict a cloaked ship. So if you want a visual representation, when you're looking at a cloaked ship, it's a very slight distortion. Everything else looks normal. And usually they'll have like a slightly elevated radiation, but this doesn't sound like it's got that on there. All right. Even other TIE Phantoms are unable to penetrate the cloaking shield. However, the cloaking device's high power requirements um, affected other systems. While the cloaking device was activated, The fighter's speed was significantly reduced, and the hyperdrive the sensors, communication systems, and weapons were all deactivated. To take full advantage of the cloaking device, the vessels had a built in mechanism that allowed the pilot to fire the fighter's lasers at any time, while the cloaking device being automatically shut off and turned back on after only or after every volley. This allowed them to remain unseen until the moment of firing, thus getting the jump on the enemy, and to be virtually invisible the vast majority of the time, even during a dogfight. The technology in the TIE Phantom was considered a potential threat for the Empire should it have ever fallen into enemy hands. To prevent this scenario, the designers fitted each fighter with a self destruct mechanism that could be activated remotely. So that it should, if any ship was ever captured, nobody would be able to replicate its technology. Due to the complexity of the system, the high production cost of 365,000 credits, TIE Phantoms were only ever produced in limited numbers. So I would say for the vast majority, you're not going to find it, even during that time frame. I would say going off on a limb, there might be like 12 of them produced somewhere. Most notably, probably four of them on each of the Super Star Destroyers, uh, and just going from that point. So from here, we're going to switch on over and we're going to look at the stats and see what they have to say. Okay, so bringing us into what stats we have here. So this is from Saneer's Flight Systems, the V-38 TIE. Um, it's from the Rebellion era, of course, as it was mentioned, strategic fighter. Has a length of 14.6 meters. So this is not a small little TIE fighter. This is a very significantly large fighter craft. Let's see. Has a crew of one. Cargo capacity is only 50 kilograms. Has enough consumables for 3 days. It's, of course, not available for sale. Has a hyperdrive of ×1, a backup of ×15. The nav computer does have limited ability, can only store up to 5 jumps. Has a maneuverability of 3D, space of 11, so this is quite a bit faster than what our X-Wings are doing. Let's see, an atmosphere of 1,000 kilometers an hour. Has a hull of 2D, shields of 1D plus 2. So the hull is the same as any other TIE fighter, shields 1D plus 2. That's something that we do not get on TIE fighters, on our standard TIE fighters at any regard. Now, as sensors, we can passively scan out to 4 kilometers with a plus 3D. We can do an active scan out to 8 kilometers with a 5D additional modifier. A search out to 13 kilometers at a 5D plus 2 modifier on that, and a focus of 700 meters with a 6D additional bonus to our sensors. This sensor packet is very phenomenal. This is not something that we typically see with most of our craft that we get here with Star Wars. Now, for it to be able to try and maybe figure out what's going on around it, to try and track other ships and everything else, especially while the cloak is up, especially passively. If you're doing a passive scan, I think with that one, it's kind of an undetectable scan, and that's why it's one of the least amount ones or scanning that we have. Now, focus, you're trying to zero in and see what all is going on a ship, so that normally is a very limited range. But this really does kind of change things up a little bit. Now, the cloaking device, when activated, all sensors and visual contact is lost, so that means our sensor packet is shut down. Additionally, Starfighter is invisible to all sensors and visual scanning while cloaked. So that is not quite what we get like in Star Trek. So I'm using Star Trek as a reference because quite often we're used to the Klingons and the Romulans being able to cloak. So as we're used to that sense in a different um, space uh, enterprise, right? Star Trek, we're used to having them, whether you watch it or not. I'm sure you've heard of the Klingons cloaking and whatever else. So trying to have something that will give you a reference here, I think always helps. So we do have the 3 laser cannons. I did note that in one of the pictures, it looked like there was some cannons here right around the cockpit, which is just not so. And that cockpit has a very kind of Millennium Falconish look to it. I will say that. All right, so we have the 3 laser cannons, has a forward arc, fire control of 3D. So these are really good systems, which is another reason why it's probably only given out to the best pilots. Because you imagine, even an average pilot, that would be 5D just to try and roll possibly like a 10 or a 15 to hit something. Um, so you have a pretty good chance, even as an average pilot. And it's doing 60 damage. So these are some significantly, well, I think our standard ties are doing about 5. So with 2, so if you up that one more cannon, it does up the damage. So it does make some sense here. Um, it's another one of those interesting ships. It was done in one of the novel series, and of course, it was brought into doing some work here in the West End Games universe. Um, I'm sure that someone probably threw it into the Wizards of the Coast. I don't know about beyond that who, where, when, why. I do know in the X-Wing uh, little tabletop game or whatever, I do remember them having a TIE Phantom as a miniature. Um, I had collected some of the miniatures from some of from that, mainly for just the miniatures itself, not for the game, but just the miniatures. I thought that was really kind of a neat thing because I could pick up different fighters and stuff like that. Uh, but even if you were just to grab this as a V-38 TIE fighter without the cloak and that on there and say you're upgrading it to whatever, or I could even see someone taking and making an ugly out of this. Now, what would stop anyone from having a kind of crashed version of the V-38 and then put on like the command module, the pilot module there of, say, a YT-1300 or something similar to that, maybe a 2400, a YT-2400. Um, that might just barely fit going right around everything else there, and we could maybe throw in like a side door with a little ramp. Everything else would probably work perfectly fine and take up that entire space, and there we are. That's just a silly thought, and whatever. Uglies can be whatever. And I don't give them any cost because I usually feel that they're held together by bubblegum, duct tape, and hope and a prayer, and we run with it as that. But it's an interesting design, and it does part ways with our traditional TIE fighter. I don't think a lot of people get to see this. There are some out there, and I know that they've done miniatures of it, so more people have probably seen it, but it's still an interesting ship to be able to throw out from time to time, and here we are. With that, I hope you enjoy the series. It's always wonderful having you stop by. Hope you're having a wonderful day. We'll see you in the next video.